Kia ora and tēnā koutou katoa. Today on the Power Podcast, I am joined by the fabulous Dr Michelle McQuaid, who is an award-winning researcher, best-selling author of 9 books and workplace wellbeing expert, specialising in translating cutting-edge positive psychology, neuroscience and organisational research into practical strategies for leaders, teams and their workplaces. She is a regular in media outlets such as Forbes, Harvard Business Review and Psychology Today. You may have seen some of her work. I am delighted to get the opportunity to dive deeper into some of this amazing work, particularly in the current context of where the world is right now. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jess. It's such a privilege to be with you.
I'm really excited about chatting. There's so much I want to cover. I have to make sure that I'm more thoughtful in the questions and the time that we have available. I feel like I could chat to you all day and pick your brains all day. But I reckon we start with your own experiences, because I'd imagine there's a series of experiences you've had that led you down this path and into the work that you do now. And how has that kind of shaped your approach to particularly well-being and change in leadership? Because I feel like they're two of the topics we so often talk about and still don't always get right. So what about your experience in this space and how that shaped the approach that you now teach to others?
Yeah, I started out in communications, public relations, trying to get messages through to people that would shape behaviour. And in small businesses, agencies, and I climbed that career ladder pretty quickly. And by the age of 28, I was leading a small team of people in a boutique firm. And I thought, well, that's it. I really, that was the whole career plan. There was nothing that came after that in my mind. I was like, what am I going to do for the next decades? And so maybe a bigger pond. So I ended up in London working for PricewaterhouseCoopers, leading first their public relations and then later marketing and then eventually branding. And in a services firm, your people are your product. So, you're not so much creating beautiful packages or things like that, but you're trying to get people who are thriving and functioning really well, even in the midst of the everyday struggles we all encounter at work. And I really started to get an appreciation for how hard that was and how little we really understood about the human brain and the body and the way we connect to each other. I was in the fortunate position with them to then take on a global role, and that meant moving in and out of 60 different countries, 60 different leadership teams, and to really sort of see how these things played out. And what fascinated me was, again, how often as leaders we struggled to bring out the best in ourselves and our people. And secondly, even when we did, what we tended to get was compliance, but rarely commitment. And as soon as our attention as leaders moved on to the next thing, everybody went back to doing what they were doing before. And that really got me curious as to what were we missing? What did we not understand? And I ended up in New York with them, and it was at a time where, for the first time in the history of Harvard, a course was more popular than economics for all of their business students, and that course was positive psychology. And so I was like, what is this positive psychology thing? I was very surprised to find there was a science for human thriving and that nobody had told me that before now. Of course, it was just an emerging scientific field. And so with PwC's support, I went on and did my master's at the University of Pennsylvania with Dr Martin Seligman, who was one of the leaders in that field right at the time that lots of this amazing work was just starting to take shape. And PwC, bless them, I was back in Australia, living here but travelling for study, said, here are our 6,500 auditors, accountants, tax people, see if you can make any of them feel more positive. See if you can make any of them feel more positive. Their reputations are built on being very pessimistic and loud about their pessimism. So I got to experiment, could any of it work? And then in 2012, with their blessing, I left and set up my own organisation. They became my first client. And I really wanted to try to see, could we make the science practical for very busy leaders and teams? And could this help us to thrive even in the midst of struggle? Because I think every every organisation is encountering, this was back 2012, I think that's only accelerated in terms of struggle since that time. But struggle is part of how we all learn and grow individually and collectively. So how do we not fear it, brace for it, avoid it, numb it, but how do we use that struggle for learning and growth and thrive along that journey? Really became what got me out of bed every day and has ever since.
Yeah, a fabulous story. And I guess, particularly, and we say kind of now more than ever, but you're right, we've been saying that for the last couple of decades. But now more than ever, when we are challenged to do more with less, and change is a constant backdrop, and so often leaders are finding themselves forced to focus on the operational over the people, and there's the pressure over what is the biggest priority. What in all of the research that you've done, what have been some of the things that have most surprised you, where you've gone wow, and have gone on to have the biggest impact in that space?
That is such a great question. I think for me, the first wow was that struggle wasn't something to avoid. I spent most of my life, personally and professionally, trying to avoid struggle at every opportunity. And if I was struggling, I tended to assume first that there was something wrong with me. I just didn't get it. I wasn't good enough, tough enough, smart enough, quick enough at it. And then I, was busy pointing the fingers of blame and shame at everybody else on the systems around me shortly thereafter. But we ended up very much in what's become one of my favourite tools in the research, that drama triangle scenario of victims and villains and heroes. And it's hard to break out of that because we're not really doing the learning and growth that struggle offers to us. So we do large population studies all over the world, and one of the biggest ahas in that data that we gathered was that well-being comprises moments of thriving and struggle, and they actually go hand in hand. We're meant to ebb and flow. Sometimes we're feeling on top of the world, the other times it feels like the bottom's falling out from underneath us, and that doesn't mean we're broken. It doesn't mean the research is not working. It doesn't mean that the tools counting all of our blessings is not paying off. It just means that life is messy and magical, and if we can start to sit in the truth of that rather than beating ourselves up or trying to numb it or avoid it, suddenly all this learning and growth starts to open up in front of us. But it requires us to trust ourselves in order that we can then trust each other to do that learning and growth alongside each other. So that for me was definitely the biggest aha. The second one, again, because I grew up in PwC, and we were considered some of the leading change managers in the world. Clients paid us a fortune to manage their change in all sorts of situations. And the second biggest aha there was really that change management, in fact, management of any kind, is a leadership illusion and delusion. That actually, we're not meant to be able to manage things. We are meant to be able to absolutely nurture and nourish and connect people together as they do their learning and growth. That's our role as leaders. But trying to control people really never works. The data is very clear. I can probably get you to comply, maybe about 3 to 6 months if I've got enough rewards and punishments, carrots and sticks in my hand. But even when you're complying, you still have to opt in to believe my carrots and sticks are worth your energy. And I think we can all think of examples where we can see people just didn't comply, no matter how big the carrot or stick was used, because like every other living system on this planet, we are all wired for self-organisation around the things we care enough to own. And I think this one I find is a hard truth for many of us as leaders, just because it scares the bejesus out of us. That, what? I can't control and make you do the things. And then I think once we get used to that and realise, okay, the tool we have isn't that we're controlling our people, but that it's our job as leaders to nurture and nourish our people and try to guide that energy towards the organisational outcomes that serve us so well, then at least it becomes, okay, this at least is not a delusion, an illusion for all that energy I'm pouring into my work every day. So those are the two that probably guide most of my days and my work still, all these years later.
Yeah, nice. And I think it's so true that, you describe the ebb and flow, and the natural kind of thriving and not thriving is all well-being. And I think that kind of gives us that permission to not feel like we're failing, in the same way that as a leader, the fact that I can't control what other people are thinking, feeling, doing, particularly in times of change, I'm also not failing. But I think it's also such a hard job. I think most of us, and particularly most of the leaders I come across, we have this innate need and desire to want to nurture and nourish others, and yet sometimes the priorities that we have, the pressure that's on, the kind of life stuff that takes over makes that really hard. How's your understanding of well-being evolved beyond self-care? I mean, what does well-being actually mean for leaders today? Because I think when we look at things like self-care, it's kind of been a little bit hijacked by maybe some of the Instagram influencers, and I think as a result, leaders find it hard to prioritize, and particularly women, we find it hard to do or to take seriously. What's your understanding of, how well-being has evolved and what it means for leaders beyond that kind of, Instagram self-care famous version of it?
Yeah, and I think this is such a beautiful question for us to be pondering. One of the things whenever we work with leaders around wellbeing, the first is understanding thriving and struggle, normal and healthy. The second is that caring for our wellbeing is not a solo endeavour. So it happens through a systems lens, particularly in a workplace setting where we've got, yes, our own wellbeing. We think about that as the me level. We've got what's happening in the wellbeing at a team level. How are we as leaders and team members actually working together? And I think, again, we've all been in those moments where we might be doing all the self-care in the world, but oh my goodness, there's somebody in our team who's really struggling or behaving in quite toxic or unhealthy ways, and that will shoot our well-being in the foot pretty fast despite all the self-care that's working for us. So we think about that as the we level, leaders and teams together, we impact each other's well-being. And then at the organisational level, so we think about this at the us level, because again, we can be doing all the self-care, we can have a really healthy team, but if we've got an organisational culture or strategy or ways of operating that are behaving again in ways that are not supportive of well-being, it's going to put that pressure on. And that was really my own lived experience, Jess, as I was doing this work at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and not to blame them in any way, but it's a pattern we see in many organisations in the data that we study. And that was, as a leader, I was really starting to understand how to care for my well-being and look after me. I was bringing that into my team. We were practicing and playing with things like understanding our strengths. What are the things we were each good at and enjoy doing, and how did we have opportunities to align our strengths to our work each day? How are we giving each other strengths feedback about where we might be underplaying or overplaying strengths? So I loved it. My team just would often say, Shell, can you just dial back your zest a bit? It's only Monday morning. It's too much energy. I'm too much. God, you told me now and didn't moan and groan about me at lunchtime with each other. I so appreciate that. Thank you so much. We were working on our growth mindsets, that learning mindset. And so on our team agendas each week, we'd share, I added an item that was the screw up of the week. So for the first month, the team were pretty sure that was a management trick to get them to confess to all the things they were doing wrong. So when we get to that on the agenda, there'd be silence in the team and I'd be sharing my screw ups. But what we learned over that month is, number one, I was still there to tell the story. I hadn't been fired yet. And two, most of the best learning we had that month came out of me being willing to talk about my own screw-ups. And so slowly but surely other people started to add their screw-ups in. So at a team level, we were starting to really use some of these evidence-based tools to care for our collective well-being. And at the organisational level, we were in a system that did not yet buy into any of these things. So, an easy example would be we'd come to do the development plans for team members, and I'd be given the template as a leader. It was all about their weaknesses and deficits, but asked very little about their strengths. And so I was still in this system that I was having to kind of work around as much as I could for myself and my team to try to support our well-being in ways that it just didn't understand yet. Now, to their credit, over time, I moved out of marketing and comms and into HR, and I got to work through all of those systems and start to make them a better support for our well-being collectively. But again, we need that me, we and us lens to really support well-being in workplaces. None of us can do it by ourselves.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. And I love your own experience in terms of role modelling some of this stuff as a leader, which is so important. I think we hear, your example demonstrated beautifully, setting up an environment for psychological safety. And we hear a lot about that term. And I think sometimes leaders and sometimes their teams grapple with, does that need to mean that I keep everyone comfortable and happy and, that they feel nice? And so sometimes there's this tension. I guess, how do leaders balance the need for accountability with psychologically safe spaces, and how they can then do both of those things with their team?
Yeah, so here in Australia we have legislation now around psychosocial safety, which is the emotional and social safety of people at work. And what we've found again in our population studies of Australian workers is the number one thing that helps people stay emotionally and socially well at work is psychological safety, which is that ability to be open and honest with each other, to learn alongside each other, to take the risk, to make the mistakes, to not be humiliated, embarrassed, ashamed about those things, but like my team were doing, to share the screw up and take the learning from it. So it's super important. I think we've got lots and lots of evidence in all sorts of ways that point to why we need psychological safety for our individual and collective well-being at work. The trick, I think, Jess, is in the words I've learned, safe enough versus perfect safety. And so whenever I'm teaching this in my own team or organisations, I'm always clear that, look, the promise when we come to work isn't that we're all going to be perfectly safe, and actually our brains don't even like perfect safety that much, kind of doesn't trust it, is worried we're not doing the learning and growth as the world around us and within us all keeps shifting. And so safe enough is really what our brains and our nervous systems need to be able to be present. And what helps us to feel safe enough with each other is to believe that we're having honest conversations, like my team saying, hey, Shell, can you dial down the zest a bit, it's Monday morning, rather than feeling like, oh, there's a bit of a weird vibe in that meeting, what's wrong with everyone today? And then later here they were moaning and groaning about me to each other. Yep. So are we having the honest conversations quickly and easily with each other? Is there the space to have the screw up of the week and know that as long as we're not taking stupid or careless risks or risks that aren't aligned with the values of our organisation, the impact we're trying to have, that there is permission there for the learning and growth to happen, because we are all perfectly imperfect human beings and we're all getting it wrong some of the time. The only question is whether we feel safe enough with ourselves and each other to be honest about those things. The other piece to that, Jess, I'll just add, because it was another one of the really surprising things in the research, and we've just published a journal article a few months ago on this finding, is that we kept seeing whenever we were measuring well-being with people, often where they most struggled to care for their well-being was in the area of self-compassion. So being that kind of wise and kind friend to ourselves, rather than being very judgmental and critical of ourselves. And what we found is that if you had higher levels of self-compassion, all the different other well-being factors that would support your ability to thrive even in the midst of struggle would all be lifted up. But if you had very low levels of self-compassion, you had a lot more inner criticism going on, it pulled down all the other well-being factors. The other interesting piece for self-compassion is I think it's very hard to give what we don't have for very long to other people. So if I have no self-compassion for my own perfect imperfection as a human being over here, it's very hard to create the psychological safety for you to learn and grow alongside me as well, for me to stay curious and compassionate and help you be accountable for your learning and growth just like I'm trying to be for mine, versus getting very judgmental, getting stuck on that hump of politeness where we're biting our tongue, fixing it for other people because we think that's kinder thing to do than to have the awkward conversation, when actually it's just that we're not prepared to get into that discomfort with you. So I do think, and I've had the privilege over the years to interview Dr. Amy Edmondson on psychological safety and Dr. Kristen Neff on self-compassion, that these two factors go hand in hand, but we rarely talk about it. The last bit I'll add, we're doing new research on change in organisations. We're finding self-compassion there also has the same impact on our confidence and ability to navigate complex change. There's no self-compassion there. We're busy leaking a lot of energy and effort, beating ourselves up, believing it's just us that's getting it wrong. Why can't we figure it out? Everybody else seems to have it sorted. Instead of actually talking to each other and realising none of us have it figured out. It's weird for all of us. And we're all making mistakes along the way, and that actually is the human experience.
Yeah, gosh, it rings so true. And I think when I think of all the conversations I have, and I'm pretty sure there's listeners now where it's ringing, there are bells going off in people's heads all around Aotearoa right now as we think about that link between self-compassion and confidence, self-compassion and resilience, and our ability to be compassionate to others, right, as well, and the link back to self. And I loved how you describe thriving as, the space for also that struggle and challenge and growth, and that's the learning space. And I think this kind of feels like it's a little bit similar. And I think also explains why sometimes it can feel like as a leader there is so much weight on our shoulders. And I know, we talk about stress levels and burnout and things like that a lot in this space. And I think it was you. I think I've heard you talk about this phrase quiet cracking.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
What is it, and how can leaders learn to recognize it in themselves before it kind of gets too far?
Yeah, so around the start of 2025, as we were doing workshops and coaching out in all sorts of organisations, I started to notice that people's nervous systems, it looked like they were fraying, Jess, was how I was describing it at the time. It's like, okay, they've got the wellbeing skills, they've got their resilience toolkits, like, what is it? There was a different level of people sort of feeling like they were starting to come apart a bit at the seams. And around about June, I read a US report around workplace wellbeing, and they bundled everything that they were seeing under this phrase, quiet cracking. But they hadn't actually measured quiet cracking. They just said, look, it looks like people are quietly cracking. I was like, that is such a great description of what I'm seeing with these nervous systems fraying. And I started to ask clients, do you feel like you're quietly cracking? And as soon as you'd say that, people's heads would start nodding. I was like, okay, what the heck is this thing? So being the data nerd that I am, we went out, we did a population study with 1,000 workers in July 2025, and we said, do you feel like you're quietly cracking? And for those that indicated, yeah, I do feel a bit like that, we said, well, what is this thing? What does it mean to you? And we let them in free text tell us. And essentially out of the themes of that, there were 3 elements to it that I thought were so interesting and important for us to be aware of as leaders. The first was that on the outside, I'm trying to hold it all together at work. And the second was, but I'm hiding. And the third was that inside I'm falling apart. So on the outside, I'm trying to hold it all together, but I'm hiding the fact that inside I'm really falling apart. And we found this was a precursor to burnout. If you were quietly cracking, you were 6 times more likely to wind up in clinical burnout. But I just found that the hiding part so interesting. We also asked them, Jess, well, what's causing it? Like, what had shifted between 2024 and 2025 that I was seeing? And I think what's really interesting here for us as leaders, and again, I think forewarns for what is ahead for us for the next decade, is that about 2/3 of the causes of quiet cracking were world-related. Cost of living, fears about job security in our communities and the like. 1/3 of it was work-related, poor change management being one of the big ones there. But what's happening is we're bringing all that world-related stress that we're carrying into the workplace. And so even though as leaders we can't fix the cost of living crisis, but you're still coming to work, you're feeling like you're quietly cracking and got to hide it, and then you're kind of all that emotional and social baggage that you're carrying is kind of, spewing out at work. And so then it does become my problem as a leader as to how am I supporting your emotional and social needs so we can keep on getting the job done. And the reason I say that I think this is a forewarning for us for the next decade is that the World Economic Forum has identified we are now living in this, they call it a polycrisis. I don't like that word. I like a super cycle is better. I think it's not quite as scary for many of us. But we are in this cycle of change now where economically, environmentally, politically, socially, technologically, so much change is happening that it's colliding and amplifying each other. And again, this is the next decade at least of the world in which we're living in. I think we can all see it happening all around us right now. And so how as leaders do we support people through that? I think becomes a really important question for all of us.
Yeah, 100%. I think you've just described perfectly 90% of the conversations that I'm certainly having, and I think many other people in this space as well. And yeah, the world is a lot right now, right? And that's not going to change. And so that makes all of this stuff even more important than it always has been. I'm keen to know what advice you would give, to a leader who is in that space. So someone who's feeling overwhelmed by expectations and what's going going on in the world, yet they want to lead with more calm and clarity and have an impact and achieve their potential and all that good stuff that we do when we're thriving and we have the energy, and yet sometimes we don't always feel like we're that close to the goal. What's your advice? What are some simple things that people can start with that feel that way?
Yeah, well, just because I know we've got a lot of female leaders on listening to your podcast, Jess, the female one was really left of field for me. I was like, I did not see that coming as a female leader myself. And that is just, it helps in the midst of complex change. Often when we're in so much change, what I'm hearing a lot right now is the pace of change, I'm just trying to keep up. And so we think, you know what, if I just work harder, go faster, try harder, then I'll get in front of all of this change, and then I'll be able to look after my well-being and catch my breath, and it'll all be okay. You can't outrun complex changes like the super cycle, because again, they're colliding and amplifying each other. So the change is kind of only getting bigger and faster for us. You actually have to slow down to be able to navigate complex change. You kind of need a little pause, a bit of a step back, go, what on earth is going on here? And then you step in and you take the next small step. You see how that lands, what are the ripples and the impacts it has, and then you do the next thing, because you're also colliding and amplifying in your actions. What's hard for many of us as women is we've often been conditioned early in life to be good girls. And when we ask women, what does it mean to be a good girl? We find that there are three themes that tend to come up. I should be performing perfectly, so none of those screw-ups of the week going on, Jess. I should be pleasing everyone, which means I'm trying to overfunction and hold the whole world up for everybody else, and there's no time for that self-care. And I should be protecting others, which means I should be silencing any of my concerns and just, keep going. And so for us as women, again, what I didn't see for myself that was coming, I think perimenopause definitely helped for me on this, was starting to go, who the hell told me I had to be a good girl and perform perfectly and please everyone and protect others? And the interesting thing, I think, for many of us when we start asking that question is, who is telling me now that I still have to do it? Now I'm a grown-ass adult. And most often that voice is coming from within ourselves. And so the good news about that is we can bring all that beautiful self-compassion we were talking about earlier and go, hey, hon, you know what? You're a grown-ass adult now. You don't have to be a good girl for anybody except yourself. And so how do we actually want to show up? So those skills of self-compassion, the skills of secure attachment. There's beautiful work that's come out over the last 2 years on secure attachment to self, to be able to help soothe our brain and our nervous system to feel safe enough and trust ourselves. And then I really love the work of internal family systems, IFS, as a way to be self-led, to lead from that place of love rather than a place of fear, so that I'm not spreading, I'm okay in the learning and growth of the struggle, and I'm not spreading all that fear and chaos further around me as well.
Yeah, gosh, when you reeled off those three things, Michelle, it was like you were in my head.
Gosh, when you reeled off those three things,
and I think many others will be having that reflection right now as well. And I think such a good invitation for us all to know that, yes, whilst we might have been following a societal script about what it looks like to be the norm of a successful woman in our society, we get to rewrite the script, right? Particularly now we're adults. And I think going through a transition such as menopause certainly helps. I think,
give ourselves estrogen is really useful, Jess, I found.
Give ourselves estrogen.
I think whatever age you are, you can do it. It was interesting in research we did in Australia. We found, I thought this was just like a Gen X. I'm a woman in my 50s, so it was just, being a kid of the 70s. But we found actually young women today are way more likely to still believe they have to be good girls. And it's interesting, while we get that gender script, of course, guys get that they have to be strong boys, so they get a whole different set of things. But the antidote for both of those gender expectations that we might grow up with is actually the same. It's the self-compassion, it's the secure attachment to self, and it's learning how to be self-led so that more on our terms for our benefit and those around us, we're choosing how we show up, what we prioritise, where we put our energy.
And that's the window to everything else falling into place and for us to navigate the environment that we find ourselves in, right? Michelle, it's been an absolute pleasure. For people that are listening to this going, oh my God, I need to know more about this person's work, where do we find you and what are you up to at the moment?
Yeah, so you can head over to michellemcquaid.com and you'll find all of the work that we do around wellbeing and change and that good girl mindset and how you can break free of it if that's of interest for you. We have podcasts and tons of free tools and surveys you can play with. What we have coming up, Jess, is we are offering a certification around how we navigate change with heart, which is a little framework, evidence-based that we've built for all men and women who are in leadership roles. How do we navigate this complexity in a way that emotionally and socially supports the human side of change? And so if you want to come learn more of that, again, get tools that you can use for yourself as a leader and your teams, we would love to have you join us.
Beautiful. And we will pop those links in the show notes as well so that people can easily navigate their way towards you and your work. It's been an absolute pleasure, Michelle. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience with us today. Have really enjoyed our chat, and I know there'll be a lot of other people listening in getting a lot from it too.
Thanks, Jess. Such a pleasure to be with you all.